Hey guys, this is Kid Easy here, and welcome to episode 2 of the Java Beginner series. In the last video, we talked about representing stuff from the real world as objects in Java. And for an example, we did the Xbox controller. This is what we left off with. And we talked about defining attributes, like the amount of buttons the controller has and the color of the controller, and behaviors, what the controller does. And this specifically isn't something that it does, but it's rather for us to see the information that the controller contains. Remember that attributes are information, characteristics. They're defined with types of attributes. This is defined with int is an integer. It's a raw data type. It's direct data. Remember what integer means? It's a whole number, like not a fraction, not a decimal. It could be negative, etc. That's just the name of the attribute called buttons. We set it equal to 970, and then string. Remember I told you guys that this is not a raw data type. This is made of a whole bunch of raw data types, which are called characters, like remember P, I, N, K, etc. And strings are defined with quotation marks. And actually, this is the actual value of the string. This is just to define it. You could do new string and then put inside like the arguments, like we did new Xbox controller for the constructor. I'll be talking about those in this video. Anyway, yeah, that's how to define strings. Then we talked about the behavior, just to show us stuff. Remember, it doesn't return us anything because it's called a void. Void means nothing. We talked about stuff being public, giving access to everything. Talked how this is a class file, and that's the name of the class. We also talked about the syntax. Every opening curly bracket has to have a closing curly bracket, like that. So anyway, remember last video I introduced you guys to this public static void main string, open bracket, close bracket, and args, close paren, open another, and that's the body. I told you guys about bodies, remember? Okay, well, in the last video I told you guys that this is where everything starts happening. This is where everything gets queued off, everything starts. Well, I'm going to take it a little bit further in this video, and I'm going to be explaining part by part of what goes on actually. This stuff you would actually be learning if you were taking an advanced Java class, but I do stuff differently than other teachers and other people, and specifically because this is supposed to be as a sort of college class, learn it fast, short semester, quick to watch, etc. I'm going to be explaining that to you guys now, and once you get it down, you'll know how everything else works, instead of starting at this, just telling you, oh yeah, this is where everything happens, and then not knowing how it actually works further down the lane, and then you'll get confused further down the lane. So let me just explain this first. Public, remember, this method, or behavior, remember I called it behavior in the last video, they're called methods. It's public, everybody can use it. Static. This is going to be the hard part, and this is something we didn't learn last video, but if you guys can understand it, you'll be able to understand a whole lot. And the static keyword, all this stuff highlighted in purple are keywords: void, int, public, class, new, etc. All that stuff, like static, are relative to the language and perform operations that I was about to say something you guys wouldn't understand, but it interacts with the JVM. So let me explain what the JVM is. It stands for Java Virtual Machine. And when you run a Java program, it creates a Java Virtual Machine. Your native computer creates a Java Virtual Machine. And that virtual machine, think of it like a virtual computer. A virtual computer. A computer inside your computer running simultaneously and hosted on your native computer, which is the computer you're actually using. Alright? And your program doesn't run directly on your native computer, but rather is interpreted through this JVM. Stands for Java Virtual Machine again. I'm going to be referring it to as JVM for the rest of the series. So you better remember that now, jot that down. So yeah, so this static keyword binds this method, behavior. It could be anything. It could be class, could be enumeration, which I'll talk about later. It could be methods, it could be anything. and it gets bound to the JVM and not to a specific instance of this object. So let me explain what that means now. You see Xbox controller is defining the type of what this is. Well, Xbox controller is the type, as I just told you. And this is the name. It's the name of the instance. It's a specific Xbox controller. It's one Xbox controller. And we set it equal to a new Xbox controller. Now, the last video I didn't tell you guys about this, but you see how this has open and close params? Well, let me tell you about that now. When stuff is created, it is actually constructed by the JVM. And what that means is it's everything in here gets defined from top to bottom. It goes, oh yeah, let's create a new buttons entry. Let's set it equal to 970. Oh yeah, let's create a new string called color. Set it equal to pink and green. Oh yeah, new behavior, right? Does that top to bottom, so take note of that. But when you're doing compilation, it'll automatically rearrange them if, like, say like this stuff was underneath that. Well, it'll automatically rearrange it with compilation so you won't get errors. But that's just good to know, and it won't have to do that. Your compilation will be faster, and it will be easier to read. Okay? So, you see, oh yeah, it has buttons. And then down here, you're like, oh, that's what buttons is. I remember that from back up here. So anyway, it's called a constructor, and when constructors are activated, you can pass in parameters to actually set these attributes right away. Alright? So let me show you just how that'll work. Usually, you're going to want to place your constructors in between the attributes and the methods. So you can define them just by typing Xbox controller. By doing that right away, we're saying, oh, this is a constructor of Xbox controller. And inside parameters, just like I showed in the last video with num1 and num2 that could be added together and returned back for a product, we're going to just include a parameter. Remember, parameters are anything inside these brackets, and they're stuff that this guy reads. And actually, when you declare them, or when you call it, so when you put stuff in here, which we're going to show you, I'm going to show you, like, you're going to put the buttons and the color in there. Well, that stuff is actually called arguments when it's passed here, and then once it goes inside here, it's called parameter. Just take note of that also. It's just a little bit of definition jotty. So anyway, we're going to be requiring the amount of buttons and the color. Alright, right away, don't get scared. That's the block. Remember I told you guys about blocks in between open curly bracket and close curly bracket. We use the this keyword, which means this instance. On this instance, we're going to set the buttons of this instance to the buttons of the parameter. So this, the instance bound buttons, which is that, what I'm showing you right here is highlighted, is set to the parameter, which is I'm highlighting right now. And then we'll do the same for the color. So when an Xbox controller is created, we're going to need the buttons and the color. So we can erase these default values right now, because we're always going to need them when it's created. As you see, there's a little error right here. It says the constructor Xbox controller is undefined. We don't have a constructor with no parameters to fulfill, or no arguments when you're declaring this. We have to provide that for the constructor, just as you would provide num1 and num2 for that production method. Alright? So we're going to provide it the buttons. Remember I told you the guys it was 7. And it is not pink and green. I would be a little bit weird, but it's black and white. And as you see, error goes away. It's all good because we provided the data. So in this specific Xbox controller instance, which is a single instance, a certain Xbox controller, because it's not going to be all Xbox controllers, which, keep that in mind because I'm going to be telling you guys stuff about having it for all Xbox controllers soon. It equals a new Xbox controller, blah blah blah. The button set is 7, and the color is white, black and white. And then from that instance that we just made, that single Xbox controller, we use to show values on that one, not on anyone else. Alright? So, static, back on static. Static is used to bind something to an entire class, which is bound to the JVM. So, if you have a value in here that is static, if you have an attribute that is static, it is for all Xbox controllers, regardless of their state. And you can access that directly through any Xbox controller, including the class itself. So, say we have something that's similar for all Xbox controllers, right? And I'll say it's a Boolean. Now, let me explain this data type. This is representing a single bit. And if you guys don't know a lot about computer science, a bit is the most smallest piece of information that can be represented in your memory. Your memory is your RAM. A lot of people refer to RAM, random access memory. That is your actual memory, and it's not your hard drive disk memory. Although your hard drive disk memory is virtual, and it can store bits and bytes and etc. and integers, etc. But all of their data types are based off the bit, because they're all compiled just as string is compiled from all of those characters. Remember, characters are 16 bits and a whole bunch of 00s, 1, etc. You guys might have heard of binary before. That all creates a character, and it creates values, etc. And that is from what everything else, and the basis of everything in computer science is based off data. Alright? So, Boolean is representing in 1 bit, and 0 in the bit value, which we're not going to be able to set in here. We're only going to be able to set it to true or false. And false is if the bit is 0, it's turned off. That means off, false. True, if the bit's turned on, it's 1. Remember, bits can only be 0 or 1. You guys won't have to know that for now, but later when we get to the advanced lessons and stuff, that's going to be important. Alright? So, yeah. Remember I told you this is going to be for all Xbox controllers, and they're all going to have a state of whether or not they're linked up to an Xbox. So we'll call it just linked. Alright? And we're just going to end it at that. We're not going to set a value at right now. And then we'll create a static method in order to set that value. And we're not going to be returning anything. Set linked, and inside the argument we take whether or not it's linked. And you're thinking, oh, what do we do now? Because we can't use this, because remember it's not bound to this. Remember? And remember, this method's also not bound to this, so we can't use this inside the static method. Well, we have to access directly to the class using uppercase Xbox controller dot linked equals linked. So instead of this, we refer directly to the class, and we set it equal to linked. And as always, remember, you should put the methods down here. Also, static methods, I usually prefer to put them underneath all of the instance bound methods. So right off when we start the program, we might want to access directly from the direct class and set it linked to true. So we want to make all Xbox controllers linked to an Xbox. Alright? And then we go ahead and we create the first Xbox controller and we show values for it. So yeah, I hope you guys can understand that from that explanation. So, anyway, now I'm going to be talking about this. This is also an argument, but you might be thinking, oh, what is that string? Why does it have that opening and close bracket? These two. We're going to be talking about arrays now, and the easiest way to explain arrays is by telling you that they are a list, but they're a list with a capacity. And if you don't know what capacity means, which you probably should know what it means, but it's the maximum amount that this array or list can store. And as you see, arguments, which is the name stands for arguments, that's not by standard, but string array is by standard. And having this public static void main as the name, it being static and public, available to everything, being static bounded to the JVM, void returning nothing, main being the name, has to be the name, and we must require strings from arguments. These arguments are called program arguments, and they are passed in when you run the program, and they're passed in out of the code. You don't pass these in through the code. I'd hope you not. Alright? And by creating this method, you're allowing everything else to start from here. So, I explained to you guys that in the last video. Everything starts from here. So, an array like this, you can define it through anything you want. It's an attribute. It can be used as an attribute. So we can have an array of strings, and we can call it names. And we'll set it equal to a new array of strings, and inside the second bracket, you must define the capacity. So the amount of strings you can hold inside this array. And we'll set it to 5, or actually 4, because 4 names for Xbox controller, I guess. And you can access that by also referring to the index number. So Xbox controller, just as we use show values, we can access the array names and using inside the open and close of brackets the index value. Let me explain that. Every time you set something inside this array, well, when it's created, there is nothing that's a part of that array. That array is empty. All of its indexes, which is a placeholder inside the array, they're all empty. And the indexes start from 0 up to the capacity. So we have 4. So we're starting at 0, so 0, count on your fingers if you want. 0 is the first entry, first string inside the array. Then 1 is actually the second. 2 is the third, and then 3 is the fourth. That's it. We finished the capacity. You cannot go over. Alright? So from it, we're going to access the 0th or the first slot in it, and we'll set it equal to Thomas. That's my name. So the first name inside the Xbox controller's array called names, well, that's going to be set equal to Thomas, the first one. Everything else is empty. Alright? And just as so, we can also access this args, which is the program arguments passed in, the same way we just did with that. Alright? But to explain more, and this part's going to get confusing because it's supposed to be taught at a very, very later state, maybe after you've been learning for about 3 years, but might as well get this knocked out of the way first. You can replace this brackets with ... You can never, wait, let me just get this straight off the bat. You can never define it as that. Alright? You can never do that. Never. Alright? Never, ever, ever. See? Error. But you can only do this inside the actual parameters of this method. Of the main method, the introduction method, the starting method, whatever you want to call it. It's a place where everything starts happening, everything gets queued up. Well, this is a varying amount of capacity. And it's defined by whatever is passed in. And the amount of arguments that were there when you called the method. This doesn't always have to be used in the main method, and actually doesn't even have to be used in the main method. You could still use the opening closing bracket, except this further emphasizes that it changes. It's not always the same. Alright? You can define any amount of strings to pass into this method, and it's random. Not random, but it's not always expected. You're never going to expect a certain capacity of the passed in argument or parameter once you're inside the method. And from so, you have an endless array. ... goes on forever. Alright? And that's how you do that. So when your program is run, you can pass in banana, grape, and apple. Just an example. And yeah, the capacity would be 3. Never can be changed. Capacity can't be changed. But say you only pass in apple. Capacity is now 1. You only have 1 capacity. Alright? And you can retrieve the capacity of any array by using .length, which is an attribute of all arrays. So inside the Xbox controller, we can refer to the name and not go into the indexes, but just use a dot and length. Right there, it's an integer. Remember those? And that is the length. And we can even print that out if we really want to. The names in the controller, well, the names of the controller, well, I'm writing this wrong. There are blah 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 names in the controller. Alright? So, do you guys understand this? There are blah 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 names in the controller. And don't worry about that error, that's just from that. So anyway, when you run your program now, you can see how this kind of works. There are 4 names in the controller. Remember, we defined it as 4. 7 buttons, because remember, we constructed with 7. And the color is black and white. So, I hope that clears up stuff for you guys right now. So anyway, as I told you in the beginning of the video, we're going to be talking about some different stuff in the next lesson, which is related to, and I'll get you started actually in this video, but I'm not going to complete the whole thing in this video, but you can get started on it as if it's a more enhanced object representation. So everything in the real world can be classified as different things, different groups. You can group stuff. Pencils and pens. They're writing utensils, all of them, no matter what. No matter what kind of pen it is, no matter what kind of pencil it is, they're all writing utensils. They all share similar attributes. And for example, a similar attribute that's shared between them, or not attributes specifically, but similar behavior that's shared between them is the ability to write. They're all writing utensils. And just so, with our example, Xbox controller, all controllers, or any controller of a game system, you might call a game system controller, all of them are grouped also. PS3 controller, Xbox controller, Wii controller. They all have a shared behavior, which is the ability to control a system, control a console. Alright? So, think of it like grouping. I just wanted to end the video with that thought in your head. So you better think about it. You better get interested in it, because it's going to make stuff a whole lot easier for you in the future. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's getting a bit long. So, yeah. See you guys later. Subscribe. Do whatever. Bye.